In today's video, we have the latest from the NHL playoffs. The Oilers are officially eliminated. What comes next for them? Plus, we have a signing in Columbus. We have some news out of Boston. I want to talk a little further about the Bruce Cassidy firing that occurred last night. Plus, also with the Bruins, is David Pastrnak available for trade? That seems to be the talk of the town today. We'll discuss what we know so far on this coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of NHL news and some trade talk to look at here today. First up, we get news last night on another award winner. Kyle Connor of the Winnipeg Jets has been awarded this year's Lady Byng trophy. Of course, he was the only forward in the group, along with two defensemen. Jacob Slavin was the second place finisher, and Jared Spurgeon of the Wild was in third place. But Kyle Connor had a fantastic year, all kinds of great production while taking very little penalties. So certainly well-deserved. The awards will continue to be announced here throughout the playoffs until they're all wrapped up. But of course, last night we saw the sweep be completed. The Avalanche are moving on, and they win the Western Conference. They will now play for the Stanley Cup in the final coming up in a ways here. They're going to have a bit of a break. It's going to start either June 15th or June 18th, depending on when the Rangers and Lightning wrap up their series in the Eastern Conference. Of course, game number 4 goes this evening. Of course, it was an exciting game last night. At one point early on between the first and second period, things were looking promising for the Oilers, but the Avalanche ended up with a 6-5 overtime victory. Going into the third period, it was a 3-1 Oiler lead. The Oilers really dominated most of that second period, scored a couple of really nice goals. Zach Hyman, Nugent Hopkins getting on the board. But then right away into the third period, Devon Toews scores a shorthanded goal, gets it back to 3-2, and you're like, uh-oh. It certainly quieted the crowd and made you wonder if the Avalanche had a comeback. But then not long after, Zach Hyman restores the 2-goal lead. And like, okay, the Oilers are not, panicking here. They're still playing hard, and they get the 2-goal lead back 4-2. Things are looking promising for a little bit, but then we get 3 straight Avalanche goals over the course of like 6 to 7 minutes, and it was absolutely dominating. I know McKinnon got the tying goal, and then Rantanen not long after on the power play goes up 5-4, and just like that, the Oilers are trailing. They come into the third period with a 3-1 lead. I know myself, I'm thinking, okay, we're probably getting game 5 here. The series is being extended. And you know what? As much as, I obviously don't really matter to me who wins the series, but as a selfish fan, I want to see as many of these games as possible. So I'm kind of hoping the Oilers extend things just to try to get more games here. From an entertainment perspective, I was hoping the series would be 6 or 7 games. As much as it was 4, it was certainly closer than you might think, and in some regards, outside of the game 2, it really, was relatively close. But then, of course, like I said, 6-7 minutes stretch, the Oilers lost the game in the series there. Zach Kassian does help them tie things up late. It looked like Draisaitl had scored, but the puck was sitting in the crease. Kassian knocks it in with just over 3 minutes to go. We have a tie game, and it goes to overtime. And I know I myself predicted it was going to be a quick overtime. We've seen that a lot this year. And Artturi Lehkonen comes through with 1:19 to go. There was some debate. It had to be reviewed over whether or not his high stick made contact with the puck at too high of a level. But it was determined that it was pretty much exactly shoulder length and shoulder height, and it was deemed a good goal. Game over. Oilers season's over. Avalanche are moving on. Artturi Lehkonen, of course, becomes the first player since the 38-39 seasons to score an overtime goal, sending their team to the Cup final 2 years in a row. Obviously, it happened once before, so this is only the second time ever this has happened. Maple Leafs player Gordy Drillin had that happen in 38-39. The only player to have that series clinching goal to go to the Cup final 2 years in a row. Lehkonen, of course, did that with the Montreal Canadiens last year to go play the Lightning in the final. And, of course, now he does it this year with the Avalanche, sending him to the Cup final, possibly against the Lightning. We'll have to see who wins the Eastern Conference. So certainly some history there for Artturi Lehkonen. I think they're pretty happy in Colorado with the deadline pickup. Cale Makar also set some history. The first time in history that we've seen a defenseman have 5 points in a series-clinching game. I know he's drawing a lot of comparisons to some of the greatest of all time, including Bobby Orr. Just complete dominating player in all aspects. Defends. He's not an offensive D, as they said on Hockey Night in Canada last night. He is a complete D, and he's been proving it time and time again. Incredibly smart, quick. He just has it all. It's just so dynamic. Of course, post-game we did learn, which you already knew, that the Oilers were banged up. We learned Darnell Nurse had a torn hip flexor, so he's certainly going to be dealing with an off-season recovery. And that happened for him near the end of the regular season, so he did the entire playoffs with it. And of course, we know Leon Draisaitl's on 100%. We suspect it's a high ankle sprain, would be my guess based on what I've seen and heard the others, other media members speculating on. But we'll have to wait and see. I don't know if we'll get confirmation of that. But either way, they had a lot of positives this year. Came up short against the Avalanche, but it was a fun series. I just wish it could have been a little bit longer. Of course, on to some other news here today. We saw the Columbus Blue Jackets announce they've signed Jack Roslovic, who of course they acquired from the Winnipeg Jets in the same trade that got them Patrick Laine back a little over a year ago. He signs a 2-year deal at $4 million, and he will become a UFA at the end of the deal. He did have some good, solid career high numbers this year: 22 goals, 23 assists for 45 points. There was a point in the year where he kind of got demoted, was playing lower in the lineup a lot. But then, of course, later in the year, as Boone Jenner got hurt, he had a chance to go back up and certainly picked up his production substantially. So we'll see. I think this kind of works for either side. Of course, he's from the Columbus area, so I'm sure he's probably enjoying playing at home. But we'll see how it works out, and if they if he stays there beyond the 2 years. Now, of course, now we're going to talk about the Boston Bruins. Of course, we got some somewhat shocking, surprising news last night on the dismissal of head coach Bruce Cassidy. The Bruins GM Don Sweeney did hold press conference this morning, and it's certainly, after listening to much of it, it sounds like that it was kind of the media and the fans against Sweeney. Like, it seemed like to be a lot of people upset over this and didn't feel it was justified. I know Sweeney himself talked a lot about how the injuries really piled up against them, but then he was questioned on, well, if you're saying the injuries were the reason why you lost in the playoffs, and you couldn't go further, then how is that on the coach? How can he control that? Lots of questions that were, I guess, I don't know, just seemed to be a little bit of hastiness going on between the media and the Bruins. It just seems a little bit confusing to some. I know apparently he had already talked to Cassidy, and he said he met with the entire coaching staff at the end of the year like they normally do, and he had agreed with Bruce his decision that he wanted to move on from one of his assistant coaches who he had been working with a long time. And apparently there was some friction throughout the year, and they just felt it was time for a change. So, it's weird how you see a GM, you meet with the coaching staff, you let the head coach relieve or fire one of the assistant coaches, but yet then you fire him, unannounced a couple of weeks later. We've heard rumblings about the contract extension coming for Don Sweeney. Another thing I did mention in the video last night when I talked about the firing of Cassidy too was Cam Neely kind of did some foreshadowing, if you will, going into the offseason after they were eliminated from the playoffs and they did their end of season availability. Neely referenced the fact that they needed to, he didn't say they absolutely had to do a coaching change, but he said they needed to change some things with coaching. And when he was questioned about the future of Bruce Cassidy, he ultimately said that they needed to do something different. They needed to make some changes. But, whether or not Cassidy was back or not, that would be up to Don Sweeney. So I found that interesting at the time, and I kind of wondered. But then after a couple of weeks go by here with no announcements, I kind of assumed that, well, they haven't said anything yet, so they must be sticking with Bruce Cassidy, who does have one more year left on his contract. But no, that's not the case. So I kind of wonder with the, how things work, with between ownership there with the Jacobs and Neely. I kind of want, this is just my personal thought. I have no way to verify this. If they decided that they thought a coaching change should be taking place, it was time for a change, and that maybe they kind of persuaded Sweeney to do so as part of his new contract, that they felt the change was needed. I don't know. I just kind of wonder if they would have said, we'll extend you, but he's got to go. He was there for 6 years. Some say he was a tough coach, like he was hard on the young players. and that, over time you need a new voice, and that is true to an extent. And you know what, Bruce Cassidy is certainly going to have his fair share of opportunities. I think there's no doubt. I'm sure he just skyrocketed to the list of a lot of teams that have openings right now. So we'll see what happens. I just found it really interesting and odd. I'm not really sure what direction they're going to go in, but there was an article in The Athletic from Fluto Shinzawa. It's just really one line, one little statement that seems to have all of the Bruins Twitter and media and fans kind of in a big debate, dinner, whatever you want to call it today, around David Pastrnak and whether or not Pasternak's futures in Boston, or are the Bruins going to trade him? So, of course, keep in mind, I'll show you the quick comment here. Obviously, The Athletic is a paid subscription model, so I don't want to show you too much, but this is the comment that essentially got everybody talking about this. So it says, coaching changes, coaching. So, okay. So he's talking about what we could see this offseason, and it says, coaching change, surgeries to critical contributors, and pending rebuild will not encourage Pastrnak to sign extension, and maybe Sweeney's best trade piece to trigger a teardown. So obviously this suggests that the Bruins are likely heading in a rebuild mode, and that Pastrnak would be their biggest trade chip. Now, it doesn't come out and say they're absolutely shopping him. It doesn't say that it's definitely going to happen. It just says that given all the injuries, the change in coach, and you can see the direction of the team is changing, that is that going to maybe send signals that Pastrnak might not want to sign. Now, if he's reluctant to sign and they have a hard time in negotiations, would they then consider a trade? I guess maybe. You always want to try to get a good return, and if you don't think you're going to be able to sign somebody who's high value like him, then yeah, you want to move him if you can't sign them. But it's just, I don't know that they're at that point yet. So after seeing this, and I've seen a lot of articles starting to pop up on Twitter, everybody seems to be talking about it. So I did some research to try to figure out where things are at. I know there was an article about the Islanders, Eyes on Isles, talking about and they did word things properly. I think they did a good job. If Pasternak's available, the Islanders and Lou Lamoriello have to be all over this. Could he be the ideal target for a line mate for Barzal? Yes, of course he would be. It would be a phenomenal line mate for Matthew Barzal. The price, though, is going to be through the roof, and I don't know that the Islanders are going to be able to pay that to get Pastrnak. So, I can just imagine if the Bruins decided that they were going to trade this guy, the price is going to be outstanding. This guy's a proven 40 goal scorer, dynamic guy, and he's still relatively young. Obviously, you'd want to talk about an extension for anybody making an acquisition. So at this point, here's what we do know and what we don't know. We do know that the Bruins are going to enter next season with a ton of injuries. Brad Marchand and Charlie McAvoy, especially, including Matt Grzelcyk, are not going to be there to start the year. Brad Marchand has an estimated return of 6 months, but where it's a hip-related surgery, wouldn't be shocking if it's closer to a year before he's back to 100%. That's just how hip stuff tends to work. Marchand might play half a year next year. It's possible. Will he be his old self? I don't know that we can really say that. Everybody responds differently. I can't say that he won't be. I'm just cautioning that I don't know that he'll be his true self for a little while longer. It's going to take more of a recovery, I think. It's fair to say that based on what I've seen in past players and hip surgery. So, you get McAvoy out, might not play until December. Bergeron may not come back. He's had elbow surgery. He won't be ready, until late August. And he says he's going to take his time making a decision on his future. And that part of the recovery process of his injury is kind of allowing himself more time. So, they could go into free agency and still not know. And they can't sit tight all summer waiting if Bergeron's going to play. They have to make decisions. So let's just go on the assumption that he doesn't come back for a second here. So if he doesn't come back and you're without Bergeron, you're without Marchand, you're without McAvoy, I guess this writer here in The Athletic is saying, okay, you're probably going to have a slow start. And based on what else you got going on this roster, a teardown might be coming. And at the very least, Pastrnak might be highly discouraged to want to sign a long-term extension because suddenly this team is a whole different spot. The direction is changing, and maybe he doesn't want to commit to that. And that does make sense. However, this is just one writer's opinion. We don't really have any confirmation that this is where things are at. So like I said, I did some more digging, looking around, listened to Elliotte Friedman, who I do regard as a highly trusted source, a lot of the information, and to see what he thinks is usually a lot more accurate. And he talked about this on the Jeff Merrick show today, and Friedman says that at this point, he thinks the Bruins' preference would be to sign him, that he doesn't think they're actively trading him right now, or shopping him, I should say, but that if negotiations go poorly on an extension and they got to the point that they didn't think he was wanting to commit long-term, then yes, things could change. But he says that right now there's no kind of, inkling that the Bruins are definitely going towards a teardown. But it could get there. He didn't want it. He seemed to be that this is information that he said kind of made it sound like it could happen. It could get to that, but we're not there right now. I mean, teams would line up for this guy. There's no doubt. Like I said, you look at the LA Kings are known to want to add an extra scorer. They have tons of prospects. Like he would be an ideal fit there. Teams that are coming out of a rebuild that want to add a top scorer, Ottawa, Buffalo, Detroit, obviously they're all in the same division. They'd probably be less likely to want to trade there. Islanders need to score. Like there's Philly, wants to retool. There's lots of teams that would be all over Don Sweeney about Pastrnak. There's no doubt about it. But they need to tread carefully here. It's just that simple. He's a real good asset, a real good player. And I think he's young enough that if they retool, that he could be a part of the solution. Now, whether or not he wants to be, we don't know. And it's too early to even suggest that negotiations are going to go poorly. Like I said, this article and this writer is suggesting that based on all the changes that, he may not feel that way, right? And he could be right, but he could be wrong, and we don't know that. So it's a little bit early to put David Pastrnak on the trade market here. I'm not convinced that it's a thing, but it's certainly a fun topic to discuss. And I do think it's possible, though, that it could get to that. I just don't think we're there right now. And maybe later this offseason, it could be different. So let me know your thoughts. Do you think there's any chance they would trade Pastrnak? If so, what kind of package would it take to pry him away from Boston? And what's his next contract going to look like? He's going to be able to command some pretty big bucks. So let me know your thoughts on everything down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.